Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Williams, and you are listening to another episode, or hopefully even watching another episode of Retail Redeveloped. I'm very excited today. We have a very special guest. I am joined by Damon Hemmerdinger, and he is the do-it-all man for a company called Atko. Now, why should you care about what Damon does? Why should you care about what he is working on? Well, first off, if you live anywhere close to Charlotte, North Carolina, they are endeavoring and have been endeavoring on one of the most interesting urban projects in Charlotte, if not Charlotte's history. Now, we're talking about a 76-acre complex that you can easily jog or ride a bike to from Center City. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a lot more. Damon, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Now, before we get into the nuts and bolts of what you guys are doing, would you just take a few minutes and explain to everybody kind of who you are, how you got to sit in the seat that you're in now, and just a little bit about the why behind what you do?
Sure. I'm the co-president of a company called Atco. We're based in New York and now have a team of 10 people in Charlotte. I came to where I am after working in politics, after studying in law school, and after being an economic development professional for several years, and then a retail consultant, basically. I then joined up with Atko, which is my family's business, and have built a development and investment business that's attached to the legacy operating business in New York. We spent about 2.5 years assembling the site that's now Camp North End, and purchased it in late 2016, and have been off and running since.
Now, would you take a second? There's a little bit of, I don't know, it's a very interesting story in how your company started way back in the day, and it sounds like such a Horatio Alger story that it almost sounds made up, or at least the version that I've heard. And I don't think I've ever asked you this question.
Right.
Would you just take a second and explain what you guys do and how it started? But, humor me and start
at the beginning. Yeah, and it's been fun to kind of learn the history. It's not really been written up very much, so a lot of what I'm going to tell you is things we've found by digging in the National Archives and looking around corners of the internet and so forth. But what's now Camp North End was originally developed by Henry Ford in 1924. That was a time when the Ford Motor Company was building factories in many cities around the U.S. They almost always used an architect named Albert Kahn, and he was the architect who designed the Ford factory building at Camp North End. They operated it until the Depression, and then in the 30s, the Ford shut many of their plants around the country, including the one in Charlotte, and marketed the site for years and years and years. We actually were able to find the records of the Ford Motor Company records about that process. And, it's funny, there are documents about a fight between a broker and Ford about whether he was entitled to a commission when the government bought the property and all those kinds of things.
Damn brokers, always trying to chase those fees.
Exactly. So Ford had built something like 300,000 Model T and Model A cars at the property. There was a beautiful showroom. And then by the late 30s, they were willing, they were just fairly desperate, I think. Or at least that's sort of how it reads, to sell it. That was when the federal government was ramping up for World War II and found this site either through this broker or not, who knows, and purchased it to use as a quartermaster depot that moved supplies in and out for training bases around the southeastern U.S. So during World War II, rail freight was pretty new. It was a modern, purpose-built facility to move all this product around. We've got some cool photographs and documents from those years about the kinds of things they did. A lot of it actually was repair work. So we have a bunch of photographs about the assembly line that repaired canteens, but they repaired typewriters and boots and clothing. The quartermaster in Charlotte was the person who set the price of fabric, duck cloth fabric around the US, because there were so many mills in North Carolina that his purchase each month or however often set the market price. And then after the war, the government talked about disposing the property, privatizing it, and then changed their mind, and then was going back to privatize it and changed their mind again, when at some point the Army realized that if the Soviets bombed Santa Monica, California, there would be no nuclear missile production capability in the US. This is not the nuclear fuel, which luckily was never anywhere in Charlotte, but the missile bodies. So what's now Camp North End, almost all of it became operated by Douglas Aircraft, the builder of the Nike and Hercules missiles. And this was the backup production facility. The building that we just renovated on Graham Street was separately, leased to Consolidated Diesel, where they built these trucks that were called Yamagoat trucks. And we've got one on display now at the project. It was built there. And then anyway, jumping ahead, the site was privatized and sold off in the 70s. Eckert, which became Rite Aid, bought about half the site and used it until 2016 as their Southeastern Distribution Center. And the rest was industrial, partly occupied and partly vacant. And luckily for us, Rite Aid and the industrial businesses really didn't invest much in the buildings at all. So they look like kind of museum pieces that actually were productive and operational, some of them, until recently. But we've had a chance to kind of find them as they were and then start bringing them back to life.
So walk me through the ethos of how you guys went at this thing. Because the first time I walked this project, actually, I believe the first time I walked it might have been with you, might have been with somebody else on your team. You guys started telling me some of the things you're going to do. And as a complete retail redevelopment kind of nerd, I still don't think I got the vision. And if anybody listening hasn't been to the project and didn't have the ability to see it kind of pre and now, you're missing out because it's fascinating. But you guys have done a couple of things that I thought was very interesting. One, you have obviously made public art pretty damn close to the top of your priority list. You've also made reusing the structure and kind of peeling some layers back, but leaving kind of the really cool structures that have existed for a long time there. And you've also done an incredible job of instituting some beautiful natural areas too. But none of this was kind of the easy thing to do. Walk us through kind of your thought process and why you thought it was necessary to take the tack that you did.
So let me just add as one more piece of context that we haven't talked about. When we bought this site, there had already been a tremendous amount of discussion about the site in and around the city and the neighborhoods that surround Camp North End. It was already kind of agreed that this was a place that should become invested and developed, that density should be built up. And in fact, the North End Smart District that Camp North End is a big piece of had existed before we were around, and so on and so forth. So we were stepping into that kind of dialogue that we hadn't been part of, but we're stepping into kind of the results of it. Some of the plans we saw, most of the plans we saw called for scraping most of the site away and building kind of typical suburban style office buildings. Yeah. And I think I don't know. I think it's, 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 I I think competing on price, which is really what you're doing when you are offering a commodity product, is tough, right? Amazon wins in retail on price, or Walmart wins on price. So you have to offer, as a retailer, something way beyond price: experience, quality, customer service.
Yeah, the next
whatever.
cheapest thing. Yeah.
And so I think we are doing some version of that same thing in real estate. If we just scrape the site and build office buildings in a location that nobody had ever basically been, unless you happen to be taking a shortcut past downtown, or you were a resident of those neighborhoods, why would you put your office in a random building here versus somewhere else that was already an established market? So we had to come at it by creating the reason that you'd want to be there. And so we started with place and programming as a way to start to make a place. We very inexpensively built out the boiler yard part of Canton North End, and renovated that first small building, the Raceway building next to it, and leased that up to a bunch of great small local businesses, and started bringing people to the site with a programming calendar that was, thoughtful and sophisticated in how my colleagues targeted bringing together different groups of people to experience Canton North End at the same time. So we started by creating the boiler yard part of Canton North End inexpensively. We renovated the Raceway building and leased that up to a group of tenants, and then started bringing people to Canton North End regularly with events or a Friday night series that we hosted, with events that other people were looking to host. And it was fun to be able to offer all the people in Charlotte who had great content to deliver a place to do it. And so that's really how we approached filling a lot of that content with performance art, with dance, with music, and then also with visual art.
And there's been some successes. I love, as a matter of fact, your background right now is a pretty impressive site. As soon as you pull in, touch, if you don't mind, on that segment, some of the successes you guys have had. And then before we get into kind of the nitty gritty of retail and we get nerdy about kind of macro retail, spend a minute and just talk about kind of what's next for you guys as well.
Sure. So we just finished what we call phase one. Phase 0 was that early activation of the site. Phase 1 is 3 buildings totaling about 200,000 square feet that have been finished. In terms of the placemaking successes, I think what's the scale that we're dealing with is pretty wild. The building that's behind me was a quarter mile long. It's now cut into 2, but finding gestures that are big enough that you can see from a distance and be impactful, but also work up close and don't block your view to storefront, and all that has been a fun challenge to work with. In terms of what's coming next, we are working our way towards starting the next phase of the project, which is to renovate the building on the other side of the train tracks from the one that's pictured behind me.
No, it's an internal train track. So, when we say other side of the tracks, you're thinking of one side of the freeway to the other. It's amazing how these tracks kind of wind their way through the development, and it's really cool to see, especially some of the tracks that have been kind of reclaimed by nature. It's pretty wild. So walk me through, it wouldn't be a retail podcast if we didn't touch on kind of current state of retail. How is you guys' methodology changed, your future outlook? What has changed for you guys in, an insanely historic last 6 months?
So we're lucky that a lot of the things that made Canton North End special before COVID actually our strengths during COVID. So Camp North End is maybe one of the only places in Charlotte, and there aren't too many really around that I know of where there's as much outdoor open space as we have, wide walking areas where you really can be socially distant from other people. And now we have enough businesses open that you can eat a meal, you can eat 2 meals, you can walk in and look at stationery, design and printed on site, or clothing or artwork and so on in the various businesses. And so actually in some ways, we're on the retail side, having that positive experience. Our food and beverage tenants don't have to, have you eat dinner in parking spaces because we already had outdoor space planned for them.
So let's go back to retail. And again, I'm talking about 6 months ago, but we might as well be talking about, 6 years ago because of the rapid pace of change. 6 months ago, everything in my world being retail, my world in, doing deals, transacting, really amenitizing large developments, things like that. It was all about, okay, what is Amazon proof, Amazon resistant, right? It's all about experience. It's all about, you need a lot of people, right? It's all about kind of the food hall model and the bowling model and the gamification of dining and all of these experiences that we were already having to work hard to drag people out from in front of their devices, in front of their screens to go out in public. And now that's been made even more challenging. What do you see as being that next wrinkle in retail that will get people excited about coming back out and transacting in the real world again instead of having everything happen online?
We're social creatures, and Netflix didn't kill the movie theater. Now, whether the movie theater businesses can make it through to the other side of this is a different question, but I think, or any business can make it through. But on the other side, I do think we're going to want to be out and with our friends and talking to a smart salesperson who can teach you about a product line, or, going into beta and playing with the toys and so on and so forth. So I think there'll be real change or a culling of the herd in terms of what concepts that exist now make it through. But I think largely the drive to have experiences and the drive to be social will still be the drive. Is Chuck E. Cheese, am I going to put my kids in a ball pit anytime soon? Maybe not, even after COVID is contained. So I think something.
Yeah, I used to spend a lot of money at those trampoline parks, man. A lot of money from the Williams household went to those places. And now I don't know if Mama Bear is going to be sending the little kids to jump in the ball pit anytime soon.
Right. Or maybe they'll figure out how to keep them, clean. I don't know, or how to modify.
That's going to be a tough job. That will probably be worse than rag collecting. Would be cleaning the balls independently, everyone with the spray bottle. That's a good way to punish one of your kids if they got in trouble. Give them a summer job of cleaning out the ball pit.
Exactly. But to get back to your question, I think the drive will be the same. I think we're still going to be trying to bring people to our projects to be social, and we have to just look past this and figure out how to this crisis moment and figure out how to get to the other side. And then I think those drivers remain the same.
Walk me through a couple inspiration points for you. And this can be, obviously, it's not like these developments are just sitting there on some kind of PowerPoint that you can cram for before you buy a 76-acre parcel. Walk me through some of the things that have given you inspiration over the course of this project. And now this can be other projects. This can be architects. This can be, trade magazines. This can be designers. This can be anything. But who gets you excited, or what projects or what companies get you excited? Be like, man, those guys, we're pretty good, but I like learning from this thing also.
So we should start with a moment of silence and appreciation to my wife and children for the places I drag them to when we travel, and the short stops on the sidewalk to take a picture of a sign or an awning or a piece of furniture. But really, I'm walking around, looking up and around, not looking down to see if I'm going to trip on something. So I don't buy expensive shoes because they get scuffed all the time. In terms of this specific project, Ponce City Market and Industry City are two of the projects that were early inspirations, and I'm lucky that I was able to, find and then hire John Clifford from S9 Architecture to be the master planner and design architect for the project. John designed Ponce, and John designed Industry City, and a bunch of other terrific projects up and down the East Coast and across the country. I think a lot of the way Jamestown goes about filling its spaces, curating tenancy, focused on short-term occupancy for retailers, knowing what they're looking for when they're looking for a tenant is admirable. I think they do great work. And I think there are lots of other projects all over the place. Honestly, I'm sort of stumped to think of other examples to point to, but
walk people through why you like short-term tenancy. You mentioned that. I think that's important. Explain to people why you think that's important.
So in our project, the vast majority of the projected revenue is from office tenants, where we're wanting longer-term leases and where credit matters a tremendous amount. The retail we're doing is small business. For the moment, I'm not talking about food. I'm just talking about the other retail. And we know that we're looking for micro businesses who don't have credit. And so basically, I think unless a tenant has real credit, the long-term lease is a disadvantage for the landlord always. Because if the tenant is successful, the landlord and tenant would have wanted to renew the lease, and the tenant sales in that space correspond to the market sales in that space. And so the renewal is relatively easy. And if the tenant fails, the long lease didn't help you as the landlord. And the problem with the long lease for the landlord is the zombie in the middle, the tenant that's not doing so poorly that they close, but isn't doing well enough that you'd want to renew them. And you've just given away control of the precious commodity of space for a long time. That means the landlord has to invest more capital to make that deal make sense for the tenant on a shorter term basis. But again, it gives you that mindset is part of having the opportunity to look for for the business that really will serve the need you have, as opposed to trying to find the thing that is both the best coffee shop and also has great credit. That may or may not exist, or the best clothing shop that also has credit.
I have a line that I always use. I'm gonna ruin it for some people, but I always tell my landlords, you can be rich or you can be cool. Typically, there's a big chasm in between. The coolest coffee shop ain't Starbucks anymore. No offense to Starbucks. I like my nitro cold brew as much as the next guy, but the coolest coffee shop was started by a couple kids, fresh out of college, and they're doing the best pour overs in the world, and yada yada yada. There's a big difference.
But they may be able to pay real rent over time.
Oh yeah.
If their sales are good and you've got a properly structured percentage rent deal and so on and so forth, they may pay you more rent than Starbucks would pay you, or they may pay you no rent. But right, and leave, and you have to find the next coffee shop that you hope will do better. But we're fortunate in the way our business plan is baked, that we're not looking for that kind of for credit in the retail.
I've always
do that in shopping center.
No, I've always thought there was an ancillary benefit to doing short-term deals, and it really stems from some of the people that I know that do a lot of pop-up type real estate. And this is something that they they really bang their drum on, which is we're trying so hard to get people out in front of their screens, right? We're trying so hard to get them on property. A great way to get them on property is the fact that we're constantly curating the mix. Right. And I've talked to a lot of landlords about this. It's like, yes, I know we want pick a brand, a West Elm, to take a big chunk of the real estate, but let's do that. Let's do some brand names and give them a portion of the GLA. But let's, quote, sacrifice a little bit of that GLA, the gross leasable area, for a pod that we are constantly going to curate, that we're constantly going to switch up and do the next thing. And maybe the next thing doesn't even make any sense. You know, maybe the next, like if I would have looked at you and said, Prism Supply Company, or looked at most landlords and said Prism Supply Company, making cool, crazy custom motorcycles in one of your first deals that you did, a lot of landlords would have said that's crazy, but it's cool. It keeps a cool factor around that space that's hard to quantify. And I think the same could be said for just having something turning over. Every time I turn a corner, I'm like, oh man, I was here 2 months ago and didn't see that.
Right. That's right. And in a big shopping mall or shopping center, often landlords will say that they want 10% turnover a year to keep it fresh. And if you've got 200 stores, you can maybe organize your rent roll to behave that way. But in a project like mine, where there aren't 200 stores, this is the way to get that turnover, shorter term leases.
All right, I've got another future leaning question to ask you. I don't think either of us are necessarily long on Old Navy, world market anchored centers in tertiary markets. I'm not. I don't want to speak for you. I'm not long on that stuff, but I definitely see the opportunity and the potential for those to become logistics type uses. I think that retail every day is becoming more of a logistics game. Not to say that experience and getting people to the store isn't hugely important. Not to say that there's not massive opportunity for halo sales once you open a brick and mortar store and get the word out that way. But I'm talking about just your average center. Do you see retail shifting a little bit more into the logistics, warehousing, last mile kind of section of the ledger or the equation? And if so, or if not, how long do you think it'll take municipalities to kind of wrap their heads around that big of a change? Because we both know municipalities, they're battleships. They're not cruisers when it comes to shifting the way they think.
You're meaning how long will it take before you can put an industrial use in a retail zone kind of thing? I
can just see. So I think that if I had 150,000 square feet close to interstates, but where retail is dead, I absolutely understand that, pick a name, Amazon, whatever, is going to think that's a pretty good little logistics jumping off point because it already has docks, it already has good ingress, egress. But going to Joe Blow city council member and saying, hey, I know that retail looks great, but 75% of it is going to be warehouse logistics from heretofore. And I can see, Joe Blow's head literally exploding and that being a 5-year process when it should be a 5-minute conversation.
Right. I mean, I think what's going to happen first that makes it impossible for them to not nothing's possible, but makes it more likely that conversation is easy is I assume Amazon and other, giant companies are going to be buying more chains the way they bought Whole Foods. So I assume they're going to buy
great
gas stations and convenience stores and who knows what, and be warehousing out of the retail space. So it's still kind of, the mix of energy in there may shift from 80% front of house and 20% storage to 20-80 the other way, but it's still got retail involved. But yes, and it may need to switch to 100%. It's hard to swing tractor trailer trucks around the front parking lot of a shopping center without reconfiguring the parking lot.
Right.
So yeah, I do think that will change. What worries me for the industry is it's hard to pivot from an asset that you own where you're intending to own it for cash flow and have debt and equity lined up with that in mind, to pivot to redeveloping it all of a sudden is not easy, even if you're willing to do it. And so I'm not sure how that plays out. I'm not sure who it is that ends up getting to redevelop that tertiary strip center.
So let's go a little bit closer, a little bit more glamorous. Let's say that you were, you pick a name, David Simon or somebody high in the chain at Brookfield, related. Pick a big stud company that has a lot of enclosed traditional malls, and you're the guy. Buck stops with Damon. What is your focus when you're looking at a future where there's certainly more tenants closing than opening? How would you go about breathing life into a center where if you ask 10 people on the street, 6 or 7 of them are going to say, "Oh yeah, no, malls are screwed," right? The real estate, Simon might be a bad example because their real estate is so freaking good, right? I mean, South Park Mall is the closest one to me, and it's impossible to replace that kind of asset. But what would you're in front of the board of directors, you're trying to make a plan for these millions of square footage GLA for enclosed malls. What's Damon's marching orders?
I'm going to say to the board, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. I develop mixed use office heavy projects and historic buildings. I'm not sure what I'm doing here in front of you today.
How did I get here? Who drugged me and dragged me to this board?
I don't know. I mean, it's a great question, and I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows, or I think they're all trying to figure it out all day, every day. But I certainly don't know the solution for their challenges.
I can see a world where, because if you look back at the history of a mall, right, it was really a community's gathering place, right? It was really where you went. Like when I was a little kid, I went to this place called Eastland Mall, which was developed by the Phasing company, and the arcade and the ice rink. Man, I was having a good freaking day if I was hitting the arcade and the ice rink. And now we have so much to do. It's a monumental challenge to get people excited about going inside of a building with your tan marble and the soft elevator music in the background. But some of these locations are so good that you have to think that the densification of these assets is going to be a really, really interesting thing to tackle.
I wish I knew the real story of why the landlords are buying these concepts out of bankruptcy.
Great question. Brooks Brothers just announced yesterday. David Simon's buying that, I believe. I mean, it's wild.
Is it just the first one? Their space back? Is it to get control of other space in other tenants' malls to be a spoiler? I have no idea, but I'm not sure how that helps solve their problem.
Or could it be, again, I have no idea. David Simon did not consult Adam Williams before doing this. I know that's a shocking revelation for everyone, right? But I would guess that the co-tenancy clauses in a lot of these leases and the go dark clauses on a lot of these leases are pretty scary, because I've negotiated some before, and it's strange to think that could all be to keep lights on. Very, very seems far-fetched to me, but that has to be somewhere on the ledger of like, hey, we can keep these things open even if they're not making money. And we keep these open, then, the bigger tenant that's not going to declare bankruptcy can't go out. So I don't know. That has to be somewhere on the ledger, though.
I'm sure that's part of it.
I too would like to know that. Damon, you've already been extremely gracious with your time. Tell people how they can connect with you guys, with ATCO, how they can get more information on Camp North End and you guys' other projects.
So Camp North End's website is www.camp.nc. And Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and so on is at Camp North End. My Instagram and Twitter is at DJH11375. And my email is on our website, which is atco555.com.
All right, I'm going to hit you with a couple quick knee-jerk response type questions to finish off the show. What has been the biggest or most expensive lesson that you guys have learned? It doesn't have to necessarily be through Camp North End. It could be one of your older projects. But the one thing that you still think of that gives you a little bit of a cold sweat. It could be an expensive lesson or just like, man, we really dropped the ball on that.
Make sure that the lead hygienist does an adhesion test before approving an encapsulant for lead-based paint. How's that for a development nerdy answer?
That was very high on the list of development nerdy type answers. What has you most excited to get on the other side of COVID? What has you most excited about your business, Camp North End? What gets you really jacked up even when the headlines are pretty shitty?
Great question. I'm excited for the next round of businesses to open in Camp North End. I'm excited for some large office tenants, some of which we'll be able to talk about soon, coming into the project. I'm excited to kick off the next phase of development to continue building what we're building. But mostly I'm excited to be able to actually come back to the project, which I haven't seen since March, and eat some of the food at our 12 new food and beverage businesses, and see my friends and coworkers in Charlotte. What
gets you really excited about a new tenant? Now, this can be retail or office. Retail is probably a little bit more tangible. Office is probably more credit driven. But what gets you excited? Like you're getting pitched a tenant, or you go and visit their operation and you say, okay, this is what I'm looking for. This we can build something with. This we can partner and have some fun with.
That they've got a clear vision of what they want to do, that they're going to decorate the walls and not leave them painted white like we will deliver it to them, and otherwise, use their space to express their brand and their message, and that they've got an angle on what they're doing that represents the future, kind of in the same way that Warby Parker sells glasses, but they also have 10 books for sale in their store, or that, you can go into, used to be able to go into some of the J. Crew men's stores and have a beer at the bar or buy clothing. That kind of multi-use and contrasting component is, I think, part of what will bring people out of their houses and into spaces.
Absolutely agree. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you guys really went above and beyond when it came to the design of Camp North End. This is a buzzword, the Instagrammable moments, right? That's what everybody's going for. I like to think that those have always been around. They used to be called, very good tangible design. Now they're called Instagrammable moments, but you guys have them. What is if you had to pick one, I'm going to put you on the spot. If you have to pick one Instagrammable moment at Camp North End, that's your favorite. This can be architectural. This could be art. What's your favorite?
Our goats. We've got 3 goats that eat weeds, and
I haven't seen the goats.
Cut the landscaping down, and they're not only avoiding pollution in our world, but they just are delightful to us and to everybody who encounters them. So,
I think that's the way to end it. I think we found a name for the podcast. Damon loves goats. I think that's a great way to put a bow on it. Damon, thank you so much. I just want to take a moment and acknowledge you for coming on the show, for sharing your experience, for sharing your wisdom with the listeners. It means a lot to me. I know that anybody listening can learn a lot from some of the things that you've said and just the way that you guys look at projects. Thank you for coming on and sharing your time with everyone.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for having me.